Come get your victory at the table. Let's talk. Let's talk. Come get your victory at the table. Let's talk. Let's talk.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whatever time you have decided to tune in with us. We would like to welcome you to another episode of Victory at the Table Talk, where we have down-to-earth conversations about various topics to assist with your walk with Christ. Here at the table, you can get the victory, but you can also get a taste of Victory Apostolic Church right here in Matson, Illinois, where we are building victorious Christ-like lives. Enjoy this episode.
Welcome to another episode of Victory at the Table Talk, the Gospel of Justice edition. I am Reverend Bryant Warren. I am the CEO of the Gospel of Justice Ministry, and I will be your host today for our Social Justice podcast series. Today, we will be discussing the relationship between law enforcement and the Black community. And so joining me for this very important conversation, we have Commander Keith Taylor of the Flossmoor Police Department. He was the first Black sergeant and also the first Black commander in the Flossmoor Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
We're grateful to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
And then we also have a very special guest. I'm really excited to have him here. He's one of my heroes. My wife teased me when I talked to you on the phone the other day. She was like, what were you talking to, Superman? Your voice went up high when she said, oh, is Dr. Williams on the phone? Dr. Williams is my professor from the McCormick Theological Seminary. He teaches ethics. He teaches social justice. So before his classes, I was always Black. But because of his class, I'm blackety black. And I'm more woke and aware. And he is the author of at least two books. The first one I do have a copy of. This is Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus, Harlem Renaissance Theology and an Ethic of Resistance. And you can find this on Google. And then also, I didn't know he had this one out, Justice and the Way of Jesus, Christian Ethics and the Incarnational Discipleship of Glenn Stassen. There it is. So, Dr. Williams, I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you, dear brother. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So we're going to go right into this. And so right now, one of the biggest issues we have going on in the conversation in the Black community is the relationship between law enforcement and us. And so we've seen, unfortunately, Adam Toledo here in Chicago, Dante Wright in Minnesota, George Floyd in Minnesota. In Virginia, the brother who was a military officer pulled over in his Tahoe. And then in Columbus, Ohio, Micaiah Bryant, unfortunately, who was shot as well. And so there seems to be a disconnect between the relationship. There's fear, there's mistrust between Black people and law enforcement. So quick story I shared before. While I was in Universal Studios a couple of weeks ago, you know, it's the happiest place in the world, right? You know, we're at Disney, and one of the parents I was with said, wow, there's a cop, and he's got a gun on him. And then most people would look at it as like, I should feel safe. But for Black people, when we see that, we don't feel safe. Dr. Woods, can you kind of break down, is there any historical context to that type of relationship and that fear that we have when we see police officers?
Well, again, thank you, dear brother, for this invitation. Really wonderful to be here. I don't know if I merit the whole hero title. But there's a history that is both connected to the institution of policing on one hand, but that institution of policing is inside of another nefarious development within the history of that relationship between Black people and policing in the United States. In particular, it's the concept of human difference that's at stake here. So when it can be captured in a quote by David Levering Lewis: white people commit crimes, Black people are criminal. So the concept is talking about the essence, the character, a type of person. So within the practice of chattel slavery here in the United States, there was an ideology that accompanied it that made it moral, gave a good reason why black people can and should be the properties of white people. But in 1865, when slavery was abolished and the end of the Civil War, you had 4 million black people free. People who were once private property of whites, now free in the United States. There was an ideology that accompanied that enslavement that said that black people are in their natural, God-given state as properties of human beings, which really referred to white people. But then in the aftermath of that, when you got 4 million black people, now you have a Negro problem. By 1890, in 1890, there was a census taken, U.S. census taken. It included kind of an overlook of incarceration. You had 30% of the population of incarcerated people as black people. White people were taking that to mean something natural about black people and criminality. By just looking at the statistics of people in prison in 1890, and today it's not different. Today, black people are incarcerated at much higher rates than white people, and one might look at that and say there's something inherently wrong with them. That has been a part of black identity since the late 19th century. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is that? And it's connected to biological, naturally inherent traits that are associated with black people. None of it is true. That's not true. Those are logical excuses for the preponderance or the continuing ideology of white superiority, of a racial hierarchy. So, in short, what this history is saying is that there is a biological criminal character to black people. When after the Civil War, what's really going on with mass incarceration is things like vagrancy laws, where black people are picked up and incarcerated for standing idle. Wow. For walking for being outside after dark. Incarcerated for that, and there are no laws in the United States to protect black people from that kind of treatment from law enforcement. They are perpetually incarcerated, which was really another chapter in the history of slavery.
Sure.
Made to be in prison, made to be workers and so forth for a prison industrial complex, because they were black and white people could do that. So, the suspicion about how blacks are engaged, or the suspicion about policing and black people goes back to the history of criminalization of black people, and how that's treated by law enforcement. And there are also other histories that are connected to law enforcement with its origin in slave patrols and so on. We can talk about that, but I thought the most important, but the slave patrols are part of the ideology of white people as superior and black people as property, which changes after Civil War. So just to start there.
Well, just unpack the slave patrol for us. What does that mean, the slave patrol?
Well, black people were private property, and to leave the plantation meant to leave the place where you were owned, and any white person could take up arms and police the roadways, demanding papers and that black people demonstrate that they should be, that they have a freedom of mobility, which black people didn't have. So it's militia with the authority to police, as it were, black people moving around without a white person present.
Wow. Gotcha.
Yeah, and there are, there's lots of studies on this that demonstrate that the beginning of policing is in slave patrols, and I believe Commander Keith Taylor, my dear brother, we've had conversations about this too. This very same thing. And I've been talking a lot. I'm gonna pass that on.
Yeah. Did you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Williams' standpoint on that. And I'm reading a book now about slave patrols in Virginia and the Carolinas, and he's exactly right. And that's where a lot of that stems from, because we've been historically looked at as inferior, as you mentioned, as animalistic, incapable of taking care of ourselves, and they're doing us a favor by enslaving us. And in order to keep the lid on slave rebellion and revolt, they did the things that they did, and they were able to, if you were caught out after dark anywhere without those papers, they could arrest you, they could beat you, they could maim you, and return you back to your slave holder. So all of that didn't just go away with the Emancipation Proclamation or anything. And a lot of those viewpoints carried over and still have some root, I think, in the way that some of the officers in this day and age treat African Americans.
I appreciate that. So Commander Taylor, first of all, I want to reiterate, I'm just grateful that you came on this show to have this very important conversation. And I know that for you, it's also taking a risk when there's this, this anger in the community to come out and have this conversation. Talk to us a little bit. I'm going to be really honest. And I even thought about it again this morning. I can't think of a time in my adult life that I felt safer because I saw a cop. Talk to me about you as a black man, higher rank in a prominent community, police department. What is the impact on you when this confusion between law enforcement and the black community? How does that impact you as an officer?
Well, first, it's my pleasure to be here, and I thank you for inviting me. And I count it as a privilege to be here and to speak about these topics. It's a rough time to be an officer of any particular ethnicity, certainly African American, because traditionally, if you look back at how people viewed us as African Americans as a whole, didn't think we were intellectually capable of doing anything, let alone law enforcement. And so there's been segregation in law enforcement, a lack of promotional opportunities in certain places, and folks who were denied promotions just based on their race, not because they were incapable of doing the job. And Flossmoor, as you mentioned, is an affluent community, and it's a small, tight-knit bedroom community. And so the relationship that we have as a whole, I think, is a very good one, because we've done the work over the years to, converse with the people in the community and have programs and things that foster and encourage us to have a dialogue and work together, and understanding that, the safety of this community for anybody who lives in there, regardless of race or ethnicity, is dependent upon us working together. And so, yeah, it's tough in the sense that, I may question sometimes why I'm in this field, because it's getting to a point now that, people, it's hard to tell anybody that you're a police officer and garner the same type of respect that maybe you did back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they already know you, I think people are very suspicious of you. Who are you? What kind of officer are you?
Right.
Am I going to get shot? Are you going to abuse me? Those types of things. So it's just important to demonstrate the character and the things that drew you to this particular profession, and treat everybody with respect and dignity the way that you would want to be treated.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we begin this conversation? Not everybody's going to have access to Commander Taylor to have these conversations. And sometimes I call it, being able to have an opportunity to touch the bear and realize that, maybe I'm not going to be bitten, and that, police officers really are here to be, to provide safety for my family. What would be your suggestion as a commander in the community? What would be your suggestion to someone who's trying to make this connection?
I think it's certainly a collaborative effort between the police and the public, but I think kind of the majority of the onus is on us, because
now when you say us, who are you talking about? Who's us?
As police, the police profession.
Okay. All right.
because I think people are going to be hesitant, apprehensive, fearful, and it's our job to make the connections with the community, to go out, open up, be transparent, have programs where you invite people in and you show them a different side of policing. It's not all about just locking people up all the time, but we're here to serve and to protect. And like I said, it's hard to convince certain people nowadays. You can't blame them for what they see. It's not, I don't think it's the majority of officers who are out there, and if you're specifically talking about Caucasian officers, I think the majority of them do what they're supposed to do and in it for the right reasons. But you see so much of it, it's hard to convince anybody otherwise, that they're not out there, violating people's rights and using excessive force, to the point of death and things like that. So, and it's hard for them. And our department is predominantly white, so 20% African American. We have 20 officers, and including myself as one other African American officer. But I talk to my Caucasian counterparts all the time about what's going on to get their perception of what's happening. And, it's caused a lot of officers, not just in our department, but nationwide, to kind of throttle back from some of the proactive law enforcement, meaning traffic stops and certain things, because one, the pandemic was the first thing to kind of tamp that down, but also because of what you're seeing, and they don't want to get into the situation, not that they've caused it, but they feel like if something escalates to the point of use of force, and especially if it becomes deadly, that even if they were right by the law, that they're not going to be viewed as being correct in the eyes of the public, and that is going to completely change their life, forever, and that of their families. And so a lot of them are kind of just scared to do certain things, are very apprehensive about it. So it's a tough time, but I think it's also a very important time in the sense of, there's a lot of work that can be done, and you're going to have to keep a positive mindset and attitude and just really show what you're about as an individual officer. You can't control what's going on in another state or even Chicago, some of the neighboring communities, but you can make a difference where you are, and that's what you need to focus on and work to that end.
I appreciate that. So, a big piece of this, and I shared a long story when I was in Orlando. I was pulled over because I was upgraded. My rental car was upgraded from a little small car to a Dodge Challenger. So I'm driving down Orlando with an 8-cylinder, car, and I'm not speeding, but then I get pulled over. But I didn't get it wasn't just a regular traffic ticket. Well, I'm used to that. But this was where two cars, one car cut me off from the front, the other guy cuts me off from the back. He comes and he draws his weapon. It's my first time ever having a weapon drawn on me in a traffic stop. And at that point, I really did. I thought that I was going to die at that point. Mm-hmm. And talking to someone, they talked about the idea that, and again, not that the tags were stolen. It was just that they had the wrong tags on. But this evasive action, this idea of moving that potentially this could end up being a violent confrontation, it seems to come from this idea that being black in itself, my black skin in itself, is a sort of weapon. NWA has a line that says, my identity by itself causes violence. Mm-hmm. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? Do you agree with that idea that black skin can sometimes be perceived as a weapon when it comes to law enforcement?
That's the idea that I was trying to get at earlier with black criminality. You're never unarmed so long as you are black and male. It can be you can be we see it all the time, perceived as having a weapon and shot to death. While Dylan Roof had shot 9 people in a church, they knew that boy was armed and got him a burger after they arrested him. Sure. We can go down the line here about how commonly it is that a white criminal with a weapon apprehended safely and brought into custody. Was that Wisconsin politician who said, I can't remember the man's name now, who said, if they had been Black Lives Matter or Antifa at the Capitol, he'd have been worried.
Right.
What was he worried about?
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea of black and criminal being synonymous. that makes a black body a weapon. Now, here's the thing that we would need to address here. At least two things. One, when someone born and raised in the United States, freely taken up by this history, this stream of ideology within U.S. history that connects black and criminal as a natural biological occurring trait, puts on a police uniform, they're not somehow immune to that history. They don't somehow become something different because they're in uniform. Now they have a gun and a badge to enforce or to live into their instincts around this history. Gotcha. This is the thing that we need to address, and the structure as well of how policing works in communities where, you know, now this is the controversial conversation we've been having recently, but large amounts of community money going to like militarizing this system so that we believe that we can control crime and criminality with the threat of force and violence, as opposed to, one, dealing with the way that this history tells us human difference works, two, what kind of resources should we put in the community in addition to this massive threat of force that is, police organizations, to change the outcome, to get at something that we actually want. What do we want? We want community. We want peace. We want people having the resources that they need. We know that there are many factors that go into the presence of crime in a community. Some of it's education. Sure. Some of it's lack of food. Some of, which like food deserts all over the place. This community here in Matson, wealthy black community, but because it's black, it took forever to change this from a food desert, right, by having a brand new store that just opened up over here. How is that? I know a little bit about that. One of my students, doctoral students, is a trustee here, told me that they had a really hard time getting that grocery store over here. A really hard time getting that grocery store over here. Why? Because it's black people. Absolutely. And anyway, all the factors that go into a community being a safe, flourishing place to live, in the minds of a public that is steeped in this history of ideology, is primarily put in the basket of the racial population of that community. I got you. All those factors. So there are multiple things going on there. But in short, in response to what you were saying, brother, we all got stories. Right. I got plenty of them.
And you're tall. You're a tall black man. You're a big black guy. So you got a bigger weapon than I have. I got a big, and shoot. And even when I was a young black man, I was a middle school black kid. I share one with you. You were talking about being pulled over. Mm-hmm. And me and a black friend and his cousin were walking through this neighborhood in Northern California, a little distance from where I lived. It was primarily white. We're walking through this neighborhood, and we noticed this sprinkler on in this yard. And it was a little tractor with a little guy on the tractor. I think you can get it at Menards or Home Depot or something like that today. This really cool fun little sprinkler thing. Mm-hmm. It rides the water hose. So you put the water hose on the lawn in the pattern that you want the sprinkler guy to ride on, and he'll ride on top of the hose, and water your lawn. We stopped, and we're looking at this. It's like, wow, that's really cool. We're kids. This is really cool. Mm-hmm. And we walk out of the neighborhood. A couple minutes later, cop car pulls up, lights, makes the sound, stops us. What were you doing in that neighborhood? We were in front of that house, actually. What were you doing at that house? We were watching the sprinkler. Someone said you fit the description of somebody who's been seen stealing bikes in that neighborhood. Wow. What is that description? Yeah, right. Let's talk about that description. Mm-hmm. 3 black middle school kids in a white neighborhood looking at a sprinkler. You fit the description. Sure.
Now this officer is faced with this decision here, what to do. Does he reinforce the fears of whoever it was who called the police? Does he carry out the wishes of that community to make sure that no black people come through there? What does he do in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
He's not somebody different than that white community, this white cop, because he's got a uniform on, at least not in the way he engages society. He's still a white man.
Sure.
In uniform, and he's tasked with the effort to respond to what happened in that community, which is a historical interaction between white people and black people. What does he do to us in that moment? He makes the choice to go along with the wishes of white space.
Wow.
Protect it and keep it free from the threat of black people. He says, stay out of that community. And he read us our rights, which was just to scare these kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's one, bro. I got a handful of them.
Sure. Sure.
So, yeah, you're never unarmed.
Yeah, that's true. But I want to be fair. What is the perspective? I mean, your life, Commander Taylor, is on the line. And so you pull up to that car, you're pulling up to these kids, or you're pulling up because you've got a report. Give us some honest perspective, because at that point, I'm sure you have some feelings about your safety and about your responsibility. Give us that what's the law enforcement perspective on some of these, when someone gets pulled over?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I think regardless of who you pull over, an officer has to know that it could be a threat in a sense. You know, you don't know always who it is you pull over. We can run the plates and everything could show up fine, and it could be a driver's license attached to those plates, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who owns that car, who those plates are attached to, is the one that's driving. And it could be a stolen car that just hadn't been reported stolen yet. So even though I know in the back of my mind I don't know what I'm going into, that doesn't mean that when I approach them, I have to be, nasty, disrespectful, accusatory, or anything like that. You can be calm, collected, respectful, and all the while I'm assessing what I'm seeing.
Sure.
Listening to what you're telling me, I'm watching your body movements and, asking you questions potentially. And if I don't see anything amiss out in plain sight, then I have a decision to make as to whether I'm going to write you a ticket or give you a break. And but if you already have a preconceived notion, especially if it's, and it could be an African-American officer too, depending on where you work, how you were raised, what you believe. But, if you're a Caucasian officer and you pull up, if you've already got in your mind that this person is, because they're black, they're genetically predisposed to crime or something like that, or they're animalistic or they're beastly or they, no matter what, I'm sure this guy smokes weed or does whatever, then that can certainly influence your interaction with people. And if you're jumpy and all that, like one of the main things I always try to do, especially in this day and age where more than likely, if you happen to pull over somebody that's African-American, they may be very apprehensive about this stop. And so if I already know that and I can see that, then my job is to de-escalate that. I'm ready. I'm not one of these, wayward officers.
Sure.
We're just going to have a polite exchange. And like I said, if I need to write you a citation based on your violation, I will, and that'll be that. You be on your way. And I'm always explaining that to them. That's part of procedural justice. You have to tell people why you're doing certain things. And even, sometimes guys, matter of fact, I was a backup officer on this one story that I always think about periodically. I was a backup officer for one of our officers who just happens to be Caucasian, but he stopped a car full of young African Americans. This was at night, so I don't know that he could even see in the car to see who they were. He ain't the type that's just gonna stop somebody just because they're black. He had a valid reason to stop them. And so I was on the passenger side watching as he was talking to the driver. So you had a passenger in the front seat and one in the back. The passenger in the front seat starts going up under his seat, digging for something. I said, man, what are you doing? Just stop. I said, look, I said, and he told me he's going for some Cheetos or something like that. I said, man, I'm thinking to myself, with all this stuff going on, why would you do that? I said, look, I'm not a jumpy officer or anything like that.
Sure.
But the reason why I'm stopping you is because I don't know what you have under that seat. And there's been plenty of officers been shot on traffic stops. And so I'm explaining to him, I'm not yelling. I said, just, you know, you don't know. I mean, you know you're not doing anything wrong, but I don't know that.
Sure.
But, you know, I said, man, just relax. And while I'm talking to him, instead of him kind of appreciating what I told him and the fact that I didn't pull out my gun or nothing like that, he just put his hands over his face like he was just so disgusted that I said anything to him. I'm like, man, you know, what are you doing? You know? So sometimes, you know, you see these things, it's a lot going on, and it's a lot of work that has to be done. But law enforcement has its role and can take the blame for a lot of what you see because, like Dr. Williams said, from the beginning of our time in this country and our interaction with, you know, police in the form of slave patrols, moving on up, there's plenty of instances that are well documented where officers killed, you know, black people. As a matter of fact, one of our residents, her grandfather was killed by, I think it was St. Louis, by an officer who only pulled him over because he was a black man driving. This is back in the, I think he was on his way to a Negro baseball league, and he was just pulled over because he was in a nice car. So how dare you drive a nice car?
Right.
You got to be up to something nefarious.
Sure.
And wound up in some kind of way. He got into an altercation, and he was shot and killed. And I believe that officer was exonerated for what he did.
Right.
So, you know, it's so many examples of officers breaking the law, and both black and white, you know, that you can't blame people for being apprehensive when we show up. But like I said before, the onus is on us to de-escalate and to make certain that we're explaining everything and engage in procedural justice and, you know, treat people the way that you want to be treated. That's my main, you know, core principle that I operate by when I'm dealing with anybody, regardless of who it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And there's just to piggyback on that a bit. I mean, what Commander Taylor is talking about is a person just trying to do their job and do their job well. You got a job, you know, trying to do that with integrity, paying attention to a history that is really awful at the same time, which is this history is in the mind of the people who are being pulled over, black people, or brown people. That's in their mind. I often tell this story about this history that's in the mind of the people, both of them, at the one being pulled over and the one doing pulling over. I tell the story like this. When I was a kid, I had a friend who had an above-ground swimming pool in the backyard. Okay, I didn't have a pool. We'd go over there, and we would, when we get in this pool, we like to walk in a circle to make a tide pool because it was fun to do. You've probably done that too. You know, you walk in the circle, you make the tide pool, only to turn around and face all that water rushing at you. Because that was really fun to do. Okay, ideology is like that. The way we think about human difference is like that. Since the end of slavery here in the United States, actually since 1619, and the arguments to legitimize that practice, since then, because we're moral people, we want to tell why we're doing a certain thing. Slavery has its why we're doing a certain thing, and it's white supremacy. Since that moment, every outlet in society has spoken in favor of white as ascendant, white as moral, white as beautiful, white as good, Jesus is white. Every outlet. One direction for this tide of information for centuries. Okay? We are all in that tide here. So when that officer pulls over that car, that tide of information is still going in that direction in that conversation. What is stopping that flow of information? What is interrupting it when you're pulling them over? There are certain things that could at least put a buffer to it, and this is that the officer recognizes that white supremacy is a lie. The officer recognizes that we are all caught up in this harmful tide of information that drowns some people. You can't just turn against it by yourself. You will drown.
Sure.
But if we link arms with other people who help us to recognize that we are caught up in something that is harmful. So when that encounter happens, what has interrupted that tide of information? Because for a number of people, that flow of information is something that they believe to be true. And when you have a system that's meant to help propel the flow of information, like I'm just gonna be plain, some structures of police unions, that are meant to propel this information in schools, in policing, in mass incarceration, because there is some kind of gain from it by propelling that flow of information. This is the seed of the problem. We've got some serious problems here. So a brother just trying to do the job well can sit in that tide of information in a different way than people who are, propelling it, pushing it.
Sure.
I was going to say something else that I lost my train of thought there, but I'll come back to it.
Okay. We got time.
Yeah, I know we got time.
Look, going back to that information, it goes both ways. So in that traffic stop, it's possible that I could have lost my life because I'm used to being, I'm speeding all the time. I'm used to that if I'm speeding, the cop gets behind me, let me get out my light. I got my license. I got 10 and 2, got my license in my hand. Officer, can I reach for this? Can I reach? But in this situation where I didn't know why I was being pulled over, and then there's 2 cops and there's a weapon being drawn, all of that goes out the window. At that point, it's either fight or flight for me. Because once I'm in my mind, I said I'm going to die. And then I'm also sitting in front of a grocery store in which my wife is going to come out in a few minutes. And as a man, there's this ego piece. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. Now my wife is my wife going to be in danger? How is she going to respond that could possibly escalate this situation as well?
Right.
So, we talk about after Dante Wright, the young man who was tased, and if he hadn't run, I don't know if they have asked me to get out of my car if I would have gotten out the car.
Yeah,
because I was afraid at that point. Not because I had done anything wrong or anything like that. Once you've made that decision, I'm going to die, is either fight or flight. So the whole idea of, and again, they weren't disrespectful at all. They didn't, pull me out the car, they didn't call me any names, but just the stories that are there that are in my head, and then so I reached for okay, is it okay if I reach for this? But it was after the point that I asked those questions. Had they not been, if they were willing to escalate it, it would have been escalated. And so, how do we deal with that? How do we talk to our kids about, 10 and 2, yes, sir, can I reach for this? Can I reach for that? But is there any conversation? You are trained to do what you do. We're not trained to how to handle when you've got lights on you, a gun is involved in the situation. That escalates it to a whole nother level. How do we deal with that? How do we have that conversation? I know that's a tough question.
That's a really tough question. That's just what you're getting at is instincts. More than just police training, what can happen in the academy. You're getting at instincts and the kind of person that's in that uniform.
Right.
And a kind of a ethos in policing in general that person in that uniform is addressing in one way or another. I mean, Commander Taylor he's a really unique brother. He's a really unique man who wants to address this instinct, who wants to address the history and the way that this policing is interacting within this black community. That's I don't know, man.
But and not to. I think that what it does is I'm looking at. So again, I live next door community. I live in Homewood. About midnight, 12:30, I get boom, boom, boom on my door. I come to the door. Deepest voice. Who is it? Homewood Police Department. It didn't make me feel safer that it was the Homewood Police Department knocking at my door at 12:30 in the morning. So it didn't make me say, "Oh, okay, everything's okay." So what do you want? Sir, you left your garage door open. I felt so bad because, I came in with my deep voice. I'm ready to fight that, you're at my door. I'm thinking at the time, Breonna Taylor. Why are
Of
you at my
course,
door at
Botham
12:30?
Jean. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so these are the conversations. So, I felt so bad. And then I'll be honest with you. I waited a few minutes before I opened up my door because they're attached. I was like, if I open, is this a trick that they're trying to, run into the house as soon as I open the door? And of course, by the time I opened the door, they were in their car and moving on. And I'm trying to, I'm sorry, thank you for, and I lowered the garage door. But this conversation, this relationship that is so negative between black community and law enforcement, this mistrust creates these type of antagonistic connections. And again, it could lead to something deadly, or it just leads to these impolite conversations in which we can't build community and feel safe. So I know we're not going to resolve anything today, but before we leave, we got a few more minutes. I wanted to give you an opportunity, Commander Taylor. Is there any last moment things? What give us something that we can start doing in our community? What can Joe Blow, who's listening to this podcast, what are some things that we can start doing?
Well, thank you for that question. I field a lot of calls every day from social justice groups, people who want to know what's your policy on the use of force. What kind of training do you guys have? And I'm an open book. I tell them exactly what we have. And I think the people in the community have to hold the police force accountable. There's a quote from Sir Robert Peel, who was generally looked at as the father of modern policing, and he said something to the effect, it's not a direct quote, but he said the police are the public and the public are the police. And so police work for the public, and I think we need to come back to that in terms of how we service the public. And I'm not saying that all police are bad in the sense that they don't have good relationships with the community, but that needs to be at the forefront of everything and inform everything that you do. And so hold your police chiefs, and your police departments accountable. Ask to meet with them. And one of the things that my chief is doing, Chief Todd Camlighter, is putting together, and actually did a lot of the framework for it, a chiefs advisory committee that is made up of residents from the community who can speak to him and give him their perspective on some of our policies, procedures, things that we have going on. And it gives us an opportunity to train them in a sense and show them why we employ certain tactics and things like that. Because I think one of the main things that has not done us any service is some of the things that, especially as it relates to the use of force, things that people see in television programs and movies about what we would do and how we respond to certain things is not true at all. And all it does is perpetuate and make people think that we can do things that we will never do, and makes them also think that we won't do things that we can do.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just going to have to take a collaborative effort, but certainly hold your public officials accountable, ask the questions. And like I said before, the onus is on us, too, to reach out and try to make those connections and show people that, hey, we're here to protect and serve you, not to harm you, anything like that. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, I could say a whole lot more.
I appreciate it. That's a lot, Commander. We appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Dr. Williams, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, what to do. So I'm an ethicist, Christian social ethicist, Christian ethicist. For me, I'm always looking at who we are becoming, who we're becoming, and what we are doing. And in this situation here, if we were to take an example, recent history, George Floyd, Ma'Khia Bryant, or Elijah McClain, any one of these situations, take a look at it and see what was done and why. Take Elijah McClain, for example, killed on the side of the road while going to the store for his brother. Someone may say, someone once told me, in favor of policing that uses violence, or uses what do you call it? When they do profiling. Okay, someone gave this story as an example. Comes over the police blotter that someone has stole a car. Officer pulls up at a stop sign or stop light and there are two cars that fit the description on his right and on his left. Okay. On the left, there's an old white woman in that car. On the right, there's a young black man. Which one should he stop? For the sake of the police officer's life and fulfilling his duty to stop crime, which one should he stop? Okay. Now, what's hidden inside of that, because I use scenarios all the time too in the classroom, what's hidden inside of that is an argument, a racial argument. Because this is not a real situation. Sure. This is a contrived moment in order to put some energy behind that tide of information that's been going for centuries about black criminality, black and evil. What's needed to do, black and bad, black and evil. What we need to do is to recognize how that's working. Some people would not believe that there is actually a story there. It's actually a lie. But Elijah McClain was profiled according to that history and stopped fulfilling the claims of white supremacy that say that blacks are criminals and need to be policed in certain kinds of ways. It speaks to what Ralph Ellison was getting at in his book, The Invisible Man, that said, I'm invisible not because, epidermis that can't be seen, but because people refuse to see me. All they see when they see me is an arrangement behind their eyes that's projected onto those bodies, which speak to how we organize communities, how ghettoization happens, how police violence is going on. We need a collaboration between the community and law enforcement that gets at this problem of criminalizing black people, that says you police those communities with a certain kind of violence and a certain kind of money going towards militarization, while these other communities get all the businesses, and the people playing, basketball with the kids.
Sure, absolutely.
This is the situation that we're in. We need more people like Commander Keith Taylor over here, who's engaging this problem in a very serious way, trying to take this history seriously, to have a better relationship with the community where he's just trying to do his job.
Absolutely. Well, I'm grateful to have both of you here on today to have this very serious conversation. It's not the last time. We're going to continue these type of conversations in our community, and we're going to be looking for actions to follow up these conversations. We're not just here to talk it. We're here to do the work as well. So this concludes this episode of Victory at the Table Talk, the Gospel of Justice edition. And I would like to thank our guests, Commander Taylor, Flossmoor Police Department, and Dr. Reggie Williams, McCormick Theological Seminary, for being here to have this important conversation about the relationship between law enforcement and the black community. And I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope that you will click share and share this on Facebook and on YouTube with your family and friends. And we hope you'll continue the conversation and that you will become a part of this movement here at Victory Apostolic Church and work with the Gospel of Justice Ministry as we work to resolve some of these very important issues within our communities. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. And I pray that you'll have a victorious day. God bless.
Come get your victory at the table. Let's talk. Let's talk. Come get your victory.